Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.
The case of journalist Gerald Mason officially remains an unsolved homicide, filed away as a robbery gone wrong, but every detail contradicts that conclusion. Mason, a quiet investigative reporter known for long stretches of archival digging, had spent the last months of 1992 researching a topic he described only as private intelligence firms, real ones, not the public-facing shells. His colleagues later said he had become increasingly paranoid, claiming his phone clicked during calls and that unfamiliar cars idled across from his apartment at night. 7 days before his death, Mason confided to a friend that he had obtained a folder that changes everything about who collects information in this country. He refused to elaborate over the phone, insisting they meet in person, but the meeting never happened. On December the 3rd, Mason was found in a service alley behind a closed hardware store, his wallet untouched, his press badge missing, and his notebook torn in half. Investigators noted that the scene lacked any signs of struggle, suggesting he had been approached by someone he recognized, or someone he feared. His apartment was searched hours after his body was discovered, though no warrant had been filed yet. Neighbors reported seeing two men in maintenance uniforms carrying out cardboard boxes sealed with tape, despite the building having no scheduled repairs. When Mason's editor eventually entered the apartment, he found it stripped of documents, tapes, and even the labels from Mason's filing system. The only item left behind was a single microcat, left inside an unplugged answering machine. On it, Mason's voice sounded strained as he whispered, "If something happens, check the companies. They're not companies." The tape ended with the sound of footsteps and the machine shutting off. For years, conspiracy forums speculated that Mason had stumbled onto a network of covert intelligence contractors operating under benign-sounding corporate names. Rumors described black-budget subcontractors, surveillance outfits embedded in civil agencies, and private analysts with access to government-grade intercept tools. But back then, these claims were dismissed. It would take the discovery of materials hidden in Mason's unpublished notes to reopen the most troubling question: who controlled the information he died trying to expose? When investigators finally gained access to Mason's workplace locker, they uncovered a partially burned accordion folder wrapped in aluminum foil. It contained scraps of memos, fragments of business cards, and photocopied documents with entire sections blacked out by hand, not by machine. One fragment referenced a firm named Harmon Sector Analysis, a company with no public records, yet listed as holding federal contracts in communication metrics. Another scrap mentioned third-level clearance integration, a phrase unknown to official security classification structures. The most important piece, however, was a photocopy of an internal routing slip dated 2 weeks before Mason's death. The slip contained a handwritten annotation: "GM is to close. Monitor his movements. External unit notified." Analysts later determined the handwriting did not belong to anyone at Mason's paper. Even stranger was the routing slip's origin. It was addressed to a mailbox at a commercial office park that, according to property records, had been vacant since 1989. When reporters visited the site years later, they found the suite's locks replaced and the windows covered with opaque film. Local businesses recalled seeing nighttime arrivals, unmarked vans, individuals carrying cases shaped like data recorders, and occasional uniformed personnel with no insignia. Mason had circled the address 3 times in red ink, and next to it he wrote, "Operators, not observers." The surviving scraps also included lists of telephone numbers. Most were dead lines, but one belonged to an equipment contractor specializing in restricted communication devices. The owner admitted that in the early 90s he fulfilled orders for analysis groups that required encrypted pagers and portable scramblers, devices far beyond typical corporate needs. His invoices were always signed by the same initials, EP. He claimed Mason called him asking specifically about EP, and whether the initials matched a real name. 3 days later, the contractor's van was broken into and all his early 90s ledgers were stolen. These fragments, scattered and incomplete, painted a portrait of shadow structures, private firms functioning like intelligence agencies, invisible to oversight and operating under layers of shell identities. Whatever Mason found, it was enough to attract the attention of people who operated in the gaps between government and privatized espionage, people for whom exposure was an existential threat. The microcat discovered in Mason's answering machine contained one more recording, but it was nearly inaudible. After extensive restoration by audio specialists, faint voices emerged beneath a wall of distortion. Mason can be heard saying, "They contract out the surveillance. The same people who write the reports also collect the data." Another unidentified voice responds, That's why no one checks them. They're not in the system. The final segment ends abruptly with the sound of a door opening. Investigators long believed this recording referred to corporate security consultants, but documents discovered years later revealed an altogether different structure. A network of firms formed after the intelligence reforms of the 1970s, designed to operate externally to avoid legal scrutiny. These companies had no public boards, minimal staff, and contracts that routed through unrelated intermediaries. Their stated purposes ranged from market analysis to behavioral forecasting, yet internal memos, leaked decades later, showed references to signal collection, nocturnal field operations, and psychological profiling of domestic targets. The most disturbing records were meeting summaries discussing post-event cleanups, a euphemism Mason had scribbled into his notes with the phrase, "Follow the cleaners." That phrase became an anchor point in re-examining his death. A retired city clerk eventually came forward claiming she processed a request in 1992 for temporary removal of municipal alleyway cameras on the exact street where Mason was killed. The request was signed by a corporate entity that dissolved months later. Even more troubling, a former law enforcement technician confessed that shortly after the homicide, he was ordered to hand over all street camera tapes to men who produced no identification, only a letter stamped with a clearance level he had never seen. When he later tried to retrieve the tapes, the storage logs had been erased. This pattern mirrored everything in Mason's final investigation: the erasure of records, the removal of evidence, the vanishing of identities. With each layer uncovered, the fog around his final days thickened, revealing a network designed not merely to hide but to overwrite reality itself. The final lead connected to Mason's death surfaced when a former employee of an unknown firm reached out anonymously to researchers. She claimed she once worked in a behavioral analysis division inside a building that had no exterior signage. Her role involved summarizing field intercepts, phone fragments, beeper IDs, courier routes, and packaging them for higher review entities. She never learned who those entities were. According to her, one internal training binder contained a case study labeled GM92. The summary described a media actor exhibiting persistent investigative behavior and recommended a containment strategy. Though she did not see the full file, she remembered a chilling line in the overview: "Subject believes he has uncovered an illicit structure. Subject must not obtain confirmation." When asked if the initials GM might refer to Gerald Mason, she refused to answer directly, only saying, "He got to close." That's why the cleanup was expedited. The whistleblower also claimed that her firm frequently coordinated with external units specializing in field operations, and she hinted that these units were responsible for situational closures, a term she never understood until seeing Mason's case described as a random assault. Her testimony aligned with a recovered keycard log showing that the suite Mason had circled in his notes recorded access activity late into 1992, despite being officially vacant. The badges corresponded to no registered employees. Investigators later learned the building's electrical usage spiked the night before Mason's death, a signature of server purges and bulk data transfers. This suggests that whatever folder that changes everything Mason claimed to possess may have been backed by digitized files he never got to reveal. Authorities never acknowledged any of these connections. They maintained the robbery narrative even after the technician, the clerk, and the whistleblower came forward. But the convergence of data, stolen ledgers, erased tapes, phantom offices, and corporate shells housing intelligence-grade tools, forms a story that Mason nearly finished writing. The truth he chased did not die with him. It simply retreated back into the shadows where it was designed to live. Engineered rather than chaotic. Phone logs showed he contacted at least 3 former intelligence contractors, who later denied ever speaking with him, though Mason's notes included exact timestamps, names, and fragments of their alleged warnings. His last recorded interview was with a former systems analyst, who claimed that the firms Mason was researching operated shadow networks, parallel to official federal databases, designed to run predictive models on political figures, activists, and even international business leaders. Mason's notebook contained a rough sketch of something, titled Sentinel Lattice, with branching arrows pointing to words like private jurisdiction, data regime, and non-state clearance. After Mason's death, that page was torn out. The police folder obtained through FOIA contained only a photocopy where the center had been crudely blacked out with what technicians later confirmed was magnetic ink, the kind used for scrambling analog storage. Even stranger, Mason's office was found ransacked, yet none of his expensive equipment was taken. Instead, drawers containing mundane receipts and old drafts had been emptied, while the locked filing cabinet containing his high-profile investigations was untouched. Forensic techs found microabrasions near the cabinet's lock consistent with a bypass tool used in the 80s by certain federal contractors, but no fingerprints, no boot prints, nothing resembling a normal burglary. A neighbor reported seeing a dark SUV, with no plates, parked outside Mason's building the night before he died, but the official report described her statement as inconclusive due to stress. The most haunting clue came from Mason's personal microcassette recorder. The final tape, heavily damaged, held a short segment restored by audio engineers, Mason breathing heavily, whispering, "It's not one company, it's a chain, they call it the third directory, if the dossier gets out," followed by a mechanical click and abrupt silence. Experts noted the click didn't match the recorder's mechanism, suggesting an external signal or interference. The folder that would change everything was never located, but a single sticky note found under Mason's desk read, "If anything happens, look at the acquisitions. They're buying ghosts." In the weeks following Mason's death, his closest colleagues began to notice quiet anomalies that didn't fit the official narrative. One editor recalled receiving a voicemail from Mason timestamped 40 minutes after the medical examiner's declared time of death, a short, static-laced message in which Mason said only, "They're already inside. Don't trust the badges." Phone company records insisted the call never existed, yet the editor kept the cassette, and forensic analysis confirmed the voice was a 98% match. Meanwhile, a data recovery specialist hired privately by Mason's family examined the journalist's home computer and found evidence of remote access by an unknown client running a proprietary protocol, traced back to a defunct surveillance contractor dissolved in 1989. The specialist claimed the intrusion logs were too clean, suggesting deliberate reconstruction to appear accidental. Among the remnants was a corrupted folder labeled DIII Field Notes, containing references to mergers between seemingly unrelated analytics companies in the late 80s, all converging under a shell corporation registered in Bermuda. Every attempt to pull archival financials resulted in mirrored error screens reading, "Directory access restricted, clearance unknown." Around the same time, an underground reporter published a leaked letter allegedly written by Mason 2 days before his death. In it, he mentioned receiving a package from an anonymous courier, a slim metal case with no branding, sealed by what looked like a biometric clasp. Mason wrote that opening it revealed a stack of documents, marked with a symbol he described as 3 interlocking triangles forming a lattice. The case vanished from his apartment, but investigators found unusual chemical residues on his desk, trace compounds used in early non-destructive document scanners developed for intelligence agencies. One chilling find came from traffic camera footage. 20 minutes before Mason's estimated death, he was seen driving alone, looking over his shoulder repeatedly, before a second vehicle pulled behind him, at a red light. The camera glitched for exactly 7 seconds, then resumed, showing only Mason's car accelerating. A later review found the glitch affected that single camera on that single night. As pressure grew, the investigation was suddenly closed with the explanation of an unrelated personal dispute. Yet 3 retired analysts, speaking off record, said Mason had been circling something known internally as PhaseGate, an initiative rumored to track influences on geopolitical outcomes, using private infrastructure beyond government oversight. According to them, poking around PhaseGate was the kind of curiosity that gets quietly corrected. In the months after the case was officially closed, a former intelligence archivist came forward with an encrypted notebook he claimed Mason had mailed to him years earlier, in case something ever happens. The package had arrived 3 days late, its outer envelope torn and ray-taped with government-grade adhesive. Inside, the notebook, a modified digital ledger device, contained only one accessible file, a time-stamped audio message, where Mason whispered that he had uncovered a chain of private intelligence subsidiaries operating under rotating identities, each dissolving and reappearing every 4 to 6 years to avoid legal oversight. He mentioned a code name, Vector Crown, describing it as a network that didn't serve any nation, but instead, redirected information flow to shape the market before the truth exists. Attempts to decrypt the remaining files caused the device to auto-wipe, leaving only a final system note, integrity breach detected, key revoked. Around the same time, a police technician, who processed Mason's belongings anonymously leaked that a strange polymer strip had been found in the lining of Mason's jacket. It emitted faint electromagnetic pulses at regular intervals, too weak to serve as a tracker but consistent with obsolete proximity tags, used by black-budget communication tools in the late Cold War. Forensic labs tried to decode the pulses, but found that the signal pattern changed each time it was measured, as if reacting to scrutiny. Another clue surfaced when a retired private investigator revealed he had been hired by Mason weeks earlier to shadow a man frequently seen outside Mason's apartment. The investigator compiled a report showing the man swapped license plates multiple times, all real plates belonging to different rental agencies across 3 states. When the investigator attempted to confront him, the man reportedly smiled and said, "You don't want this job," before disappearing into a parking structure, where all cameras failed simultaneously for exactly 12 minutes. By early winter, 3 journalists who had worked with Mason began receiving anonymous emails containing only coordinates. When one followed them, he found a payphone deep in an abandoned rest stop. Inside its coin slot was an SD card wrapped in aluminum foil. The card contained a single high-resolution scan of a document titled Interim Behavioral Modeling Directive, stamped with the same interlocking triangle symbol Mason described. The contents reference developing prediction frameworks outside federal purview, with footnotes citing data streams from non-public collectors. The journalist attempted to publish the findings, but within hours the article was removed, his Logan credentials revoked, and his editor told him to take a long sabbatical.